This is Food for Thought with Deborah Walker. Hi, I'm Deborah Walker. Thanks for joining me today on Food for Thought. Now, with me discussing her book, Our Return to the Light, and her philosophy, I have naturopathic nutritionist, healer, teacher and author Barbara Wren with me. Now, Barbara, by proxy, changed my life. After years of illness, my naturopath, who was trained by Barbara, worked with me using her philosophy to restore my body back to health. I then went on to train in a similar philosophy, which now changes my clients' lives. So, Barbara, you've had a huge influence not only on my life, but also my clients, which I'm actually eternally grateful. So it's my absolute pleasure to be talking with you today, Barbara.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, you've developed your naturopathic philosophy over many, many years to what it is today. What has been the progression of your own thinking to develop the philosophy that you've got?
That's a really interesting question, Deborah. I became very ill after my fourth child was born. And so I started reading, conventional and otherwise. And I was in the camp that thought that so long as it wasn't a drug, it was going to be natural. But very, very quickly, I was of the opinion that it wasn't what you use, it's the philosophy within which you use it. And then I had the great pleasure of meeting Dr. Alec Forbes, who set up the Bristol Cancer Help Centre. And my ex-husband and I bought a property in Tiverton because he wished to have alternative clinics in many towns around the country. It was an amazing, amazing dream and aim to have. And so for several years, I was exposed to, I can't tell you how many different ways of healing. And, more than anything, I was aware of energy. I can't get away from the fact that flowers arranged by a friend of mine in the healing room didn't die. The flowers in the reception area took an awfully long time to die. And so then I decided I would study homeopathy, which was great, it was fascinating, but it only functions on a hypothesis. And of course there are many, many ways of practicing that, and all the different countries in the world seem to have a slightly different slant. And then I came across 5-element acupuncture and beyond, the Eastern way of looking at things. And, I thought that I've just been reborn, where everything you look at, everything that's said, the sound of everything, the smell of everything has a profound, profound significance. And so I would say that was probably the biggest influence of this total respect for the cycles and respect for the fact that even more you had to use everything within the philosophy. And then the next thing was I met Dr. Max Gerson's granddaughter, and that was an absolute delight because by this time I had very much realized within my own healing journey that one could use something and it felt absolutely fabulous for about 3 weeks, and then all of that diminished and one started to feel really not good. And I think it was coming across Dr. Max Gerson's work which taught me so much about the push and pull within the body, the yin and the yang. If you put something in, you are going to displace something. You need to be able to release it. And that really doesn't matter on whichever level you're speaking, spiritual, emotional, or physical. There has to be this release mechanism. It became very obvious to me that there aren't little holes in the body where there might be a deficiency of magnesium, and along it trots and slots in. It really does not work like that. So I would say meeting Alec Forbes, discovering Gerson's work, as was very appropriate back then, but most particularly the Eastern way of looking at absolutely everything as a resonance, really is the thing that's guided me.
It's fascinating when you talk about the resonance side of the work, because I feel that I'm now all for empowering people to take charge and understanding their own health picture and how therefore they can rebalance their body. And I feel that your approach to this actually is very different than the way that normal nutrition is taught nowadays. And I remember on the workshop you actually said that nutrition needs rewriting, it's desperately wrong. What did you exactly mean by that? Because I do think it's probably linked to that picture of resonance that you're talking about.
Absolutely, Deborah. After 45 years of, profoundly studying this, on this journey, I am totally, utterly convinced that light controls everything. I use the word control in the gentlest, softest way. In other words, it manages everything. It decides how everything in the body will work. And that it has such a control over all of the rhythms. And I really feel that one of the greatest forms of control has been to separate everything off, rather than everything in the universe being connected. So when Hay House came to ask me to write Cellular Awakening, for example, I said, well, yes, I'd never thought of writing a book. Yes, I would like to do that, but it would be a book which I hope would incorporate heaven and earth. Because I'd become, really sort of frustrated at brilliant spiritual courses and absolutely horrific nutrition courses, teachings, because one didn't serve the other. It was keeping this all so compartmentalized. And, one of the prime examples is that behind each chakra lies an endocrine gland. And my mind, which is typically Scorpio and wants to join up the dots also, saying, well, therefore there has to be a huge connection. And about 36 years ago, lucky enough to know Harry Oldfield, who did so much brilliant work and still is an amazing, amazing man, working with light. And so he would come to stay with us, and we'd go down into the depths of our cellar, which was good and dark, and he would show us the Kirlian emanations. He would show us the meridians. And Harry could tell us if someone had had a headache 24 hours ago and how long it lasted for. And his powers of looking in to see from the light emanation from the body is absolutely staggering. So for me, nutrition should be guided by that. And then, of course, I came across all the work of Tesla, Royal Rice, Gaston Neeson, Becham, all of those people, and really, and Steiner, and all of those people are paying this huge respect to resonance, as all of the Eastern ways are. So here I was, absolutely convinced that light controlled everything. And then I came across the work of Budwig and had all her books translated into English because I don't speak German and always had a multinational college, so that was useful. And yes, became very fascinated by this awareness of trapping light from outside. But of course I'm guided by the philosophy as above, so below. What is outside is also within. And so the last part of what has gone on, really, and beyond our return to the light, there's always more you want to write when you finish the book, is looking at how light is produced from within. And, having the realization that deep in the ocean, where it's a methane environment mainly, and no light, that these creatures are producing vast amounts of light. So it seemed to me that nutrition should serve the purpose of producing light. And the reason that I felt that so passionately is, it's spoken about in yoga. I was a great Iyengar yoga fan for years. When you think of Iyengar's light on yoga, all of that, I realized that nutrition should be all about that. And understanding light as a resonance, I truly believe that it brings in the universal wisdom. And it seemed to me that in training practitioners, one was really hoping that one was training people to facilitate their patients in contacting their own inner wisdom. But not just that their inner wisdom should expand. And so I feel that we have lost access to many dimensions that exist in this amazing universe, and that with the right nutrition, it's possible for a person to produce a lot of light, and all of this being controlled through the pineal, the third eye, and that they can, therefore, with resonance on the water in their body, hear the solutions. Because we know that saying, you cannot solve a problem that has been created from one paradigm with a solution from within that same paradigm. And if a person is in dis-ease, I truly believe they need to be able to shift paradigm and access a different dimension. And unfortunately, the final part of looking at this has fallen to me after finishing our return to the light. But really understanding that with the correct diet, the correct composition of the diet for that person will enable the pineal to produce melatonin, and the melatonin to be instrumental in producing porphyrins, which produce light. But the other part of the story, which is so exciting, is that these substances are so similar to substances used for mind expansion, for want of a better expression, in different shamanic and various spiritual practices, enabling people to gain information that their body isn't able to gain without using them. But here we find that the human body is able to do this with correct nutrition. And so for me, it is all about shifting paradigm, accessing different dimensions, producing a lot of light. That's for me what nutrition is about, because I truly believe that unless the resonance of the solution resonates within the body, they will not be able to achieve it through their mind. The mind just gets in the way. I believe that the blueprint, the resonance of the solution needs to be felt by the human body so that it can make that shift.
This is a far more expansive approach than is taught generally. The application I see of nutrition is quite allopathic, which completely cuts out everything that you've spoken about there, apart from one aspect of it, which is probably bringing in the electron-rich foods, isn't it?
Yes, but people have only come to that since I've been really going on about it. No, but then there's no point in having electron-rich food unless the charge of the cell membrane can attract them. We have a lot of responsibility in this, because unless, you have a positive nucleus, a negative inner membrane, and a highly positive outer membrane, you will not attract those negatively charged subatomic particles. And that cell membrane potential is where the knowledge seems to be held, the wisdom, the brain of the cell membrane.
Which is partly Bruce Lipton's work, isn't it? Candice Pert talks about that.
That book was sent to me as soon as it was printed by an American student and said, "Here, open it at the chapter I've marked. It's what you've been banging on about for years." And it was great when the Biology of Belief came out. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was easy for people to, side-eye me as that airhead and that, waffling spiritual, and absolutely not. I have my feet firmly on the ground and believe that everything should serve each other, and nutrition is part of the spiritual journey. It has to be. It's what grows on planet Earth, definitely. I mean, the electron-photon is the sort of summing up of heaven and earth being combined.
I had the pleasure of talking to Robert Foreman about enlightenment ain't all it's cracked up to be. And he's one of America's foremost spiritual leaders at the moment. He talked about his amazing journey through life in the search of the experience of enlightenment and how much it was influenced by the pursuit of spirituality.
Enlightenment has a far, far bigger physical meaning than people understand. Enlightenment means producing light from within. And again, I go back to as above, so below. And I don't think there can be a stronger sort of guidance than as above, so below. It's my favourite symbol. I have it in all sorts of places in my house. I think it's very, very meaningful. Yeah.
Now, you referred to Beauchamp. We're taught that disease comes from outside of us, and you're clearly at odds with that. Obviously, support the Beauchamp model where all disease is created from within. That's quite profound, really, because it means that you have to take responsibility for the creation of your own body and your own health.
Yes, I mean, there's a real irony, as there always is, and jokes by the universe in one's life. I mean, I nursed at St Mary's where penicillin was discovered. But what we should remember is that Pasteur did, at the end of his life, say he was wrong. That he actually conceded that Beauchamp was actually correct. And what Beauchamp and Gaston Nissen and Rice and all those people are saying, it is the soil within that decides how the seed grows. And, it is our responsibility. And what I find so desperately difficult is that people do not believe they are in control of their own life. I mean, it was quite remarkable on Wednesday when I came back from the support group. I collected my little dog who goes to a lovely farm. And the farmer's wife, feet well on the ground, some time ago asked me to look in at what she was being prescribed for osteoporosis and all sorts of things. Anyway, she took me by surprise on Wednesday evening and said, "By the way, Barbara, I don't take anything. And my diet is absolutely extraordinary. Every single test has come back like an 18-year-old. This is a woman of 65. Absolutely, what I find so sad is really having to support people to step outside leaning, for somebody else to do it. How can anybody else pick up the inner wisdom? This is why I use the word facilitator. A practitioner can't know the answers and give guidance, but basically the ultimate journey and changing and truth has to come from within the person because they're unique. Yeah.
I find it fascinating that you refer to yourself as a facilitator, because that is exactly how I see myself. I always see that the individual holds the wisdom, and it is about me enabling them to access that wisdom.
That's right. Having confidence. This is why I find the Eastern way so wonderful. The other day, I do have a birth chart that joins everything up. And I just considered that was something I needed to use. But when I met the Eastern philosophy, and this is absolutely true story, the lady who came into the group because she explained she was there because her daughter had Crohn's. And after a little while, after greeting her, I went back to her and I said, "Where's the TB in the family?" And she looked really shocked and she said, "Oh, my father had TB." And then I went back and I said, "Is there autism in your family?" And she said, "Oh dear, yes, my daughter with Crohn's, her son has autism." And then she added, "I'm a twin. I had anorexia, my twin had anorexia, and my twin died." Now that is an amazing mental picture. It is a total demonstration of the understanding in the East of these progressions. And this is why in our Return to the Light, I focused a lot on what I call the tubercular taint, because it just appears to me that rather than solving issues in the past, they're coming through as very, very strong predispositions. And that's the area where I think all of the information really is, in the predispositions, as to why this has happened or that. And when you think of Beisham, as you mentioned, if things are not resolved in a generation and that energetic blueprint is passed on, then the inner soil is going to become very, very weakened. And then if people suppress things rather than working through and resolving them, then we start seeing some really unpleasant things happening. And that's very much where I think we are today. People not actually understanding that if they're given the correct information, and that's the big if, they can take charge of their own health and, I believe, their own destiny as a result of that.
And you refer to one of the vaccinations in the book about how having an understanding of the generational health picture can help you to make a decision about taking or not taking a vaccination because of the way it might affect you in the future.
Yes, I mean, if one is looking at vaccines as a resonance of a disease, then if a person's soil, shall we say, the resonance of the soil within has reached a certain level, depending on which element and the Eastern way of looking, then if you put an extra stress, then it can only go deeper. Because remembering that all stress is felt as a resonance on the water component of the body, and the water element in the East is understood to hold the central nervous system. So it's holding all of that information as a resonance. So put an extra stress in, the level of dehydration will increase, the amount of stagnation will increase, the amount of inflammation will increase. And that's when we start seeing. You see, people don't teach hierarchy of organs. Some organs are much more superficial than others. I mean, for example, the liver, and we need all of them, they're all as important, but the liver can be 2/3 destroyed and regenerate with the right treatment. Gerson found this time and time again. Then you go deeper, and in the West, you think of the skin as the third kidney. In the East, it's the third lung. So they're on a level. So you go liver, which is so robust. Then you've got 2 lungs and you've got 2 kidneys. So they're much more delicate, and they tend to get offloaded too if liver isn't doing its job, and skin. And then you go deeper to heart and mind. So there are these different levels that disease can be pushed into. And nothing happens by chance. There is always a very, very logical line, if you know what you're looking at, that the body will always take. To the point where if someone has forgotten to tell you something, because the body does not know how to do random leaps. It just hasn't got that in its makeup.
And this is where taking a really robust case history truly helps, isn't it? Because you can map out what has happened and that progression.
Well, you can if people understand the Eastern way of looking at things. If they do understand these different levels and the way the human body works and mind and how it's recorded, then you can show people. And that, for me, is the most important part of my work, because that's the empowerment. And if people are empowered, they feel less fear. And as soon as they feel less fear, there's a lot of letting go and change within the central nervous system and the fluids component in their body.
And what I found fascinating when I was listening to you was how you say we're to empower our client with their story. Absolutely. So focusing on the story helps to raise their vibration and change their resonance.
Well, absolutely, because if one hands it back in a way that they recognize, and I'm not talking intellectually necessarily, if someone has heard you in all of themselves. There is a complete change in the room. There's a change of sound. It's so totally silent. When people feel the truth, and so it needs to be handed back in a way that their body understands as well. Because every part of us, the understanding isn't just in the mind. The central nervous system, as we say in the East, is the entire water element. So the brain is 80% water, the rest of the body should be 70% water. So every single cell can feel the story you're handing back. And that, for me, is where you make that connection, that empathy. And, when people say to me, Barbara, how do you persuade people not to do this, that, or the other? Don't. If their body can hear it, then they're ready to take that step.
I find that a really interesting comment because I was sat in a room with nutritionists on a workshop a few years ago, and they were talking about compliance of their clients. And I was explaining that actually, I was sat there quite amazed that they were having a struggle with compliance. And they were saying, well, what do you do that's different? And I said, I let them understand their own story, their own picture. And therefore, compliance isn't really what I'm looking for. It's that whole wisdom that actually they create their own choices and they understand from their own experiences of how they are feeling. Therefore, it's not about compliance or discipline at that point or willpower. It's actually about the experiences. So they want it. They want more of it.
And things have already changed because at that point there is less fear, there is more fluid movement, and so the whole process has already started. Yeah.
And I've never seen the term about the body going into dehydration or anywhere else. And the description as you put together about the impact that it has on our wisdom that the stress has. How come that isn't really made more of, do you think?
It's there in the East. There in the East, they know that if a stress, and by stress, they would perhaps be talking about an emotional one. Mm-hmm. If that is not resolved and the transition through after 2 years, then the water element will always join the picture. So let's take, for example, if someone has been born with a predisposition, and that predisposition is not resolved in the early stage of life. It should really be resolved preconceptually, that whole area of passion of mine. If not, that person will come in with a resonance of stress. Mm-hmm. And so by the passing of 2 years, if that's not removed, water element joins in, and you get happening what I've described in my books, that you get this protection happening to preserve the fluids within the cell so the person doesn't dehydrate to a serious condition. Mm. And, the way everybody is these days, because people are not working to the rhythms, the circadian rhythm, all of those things. Everyone is in stress, everybody's in fear, therefore they're all on dehydration alert, which means that their vehicle is only partially working. Very, very important when working with somebody, to empower them, so fear is reduced, so there's more flow, and the understanding that the colon is the organ that tells us whether we're dehydrated or not. It is the liver that then does the biochemistry. And so it's very important that mechanically the right things can be held in the colon to register this. The colon will hold the message. And so if one thinks of everything that you put into your mouth, this is leaving thoughts and behaviour out of it, we just think of food at the moment, every single thing that you put in has a message. Some have gentle messages, some have incredibly strong. So, the cheese sandwich with pickles and black coffee, it's stressful, which way you look at it, as opposed to a vegetable soup, for example. And so we're really looking at fluids, holding fluids for the colon, but then looking at diet to not be stressful. We're looking at diet to create a maximum of movement, remembering that it is the liver that controls the hydration. So everything that you're doing, but firstly, the empowerment and that sort of relaxation and deep sigh that comes with understanding their own story. That's going to have a huge effect on the bowel. We talk about gut feeling. Second brain, it feels so much. The number of nerve endings it has. So it's no small wonder that, we associate that with feeling, central nervous system, fluid. Yeah.
Fascinating. Now, who specifically influences your work? Now, you've talked about Tesla, Harry Oldfield, who is just an amazing man, in the likes of Rife, but who else is influencing your work from both now and the past?
I think I've mentioned most. I think it's just really inner guidance.
That's interesting.
It's just amazing what the universe does. I will be thinking of something, and lo and behold, the universe will present for patients with exactly the understanding that one needs. And it's been like that all along. But yes, the Eastern teaching has been the biggest, without a doubt. And then, Professor Popple, the people looking at light, but, equally looking at, meditation, yoga, all of those things as well, have all had a great influence on my life. Yeah.
Now, you've been working in this field for over 30 years, is my understanding. You're still writing books, delivering workshops, you're still busy with your own client base. What is driving you still to be doing what you're doing?
Nothing drives me. Nothing drives me at all. I think it's who I am. And it's over 40 years I've been working in this field.
Wow.
And teaching over 30 years.
Okay.
And, I have 5 children, 11 grandchildren, about to have a 3rd great-grandchild. It is life. It's, I shall carry on so long as I and the people I work with get pleasure from it. And as I say, there's no driving. Don't much enjoy writing books, I have to say. If Hay House hadn't come to ask me to do it, it would never have happened. Or would have nagged me for years. I kind of think it is me. Therefore, there's no driving. I'm only expressing, in a way, who I am and what I understand and what comes to me. And I'm lucky enough that people come and kind of prove it. Yeah.
Now, you say you wouldn't have written your books, and yet, for me, they're books that I actually give out to my clients nearly every week. So I'm probably keeping Hay House going on my own at the moment. But I'm wondering, you've written 2 so far, and I'm wondering if there's a 3rd on the way, because I'm highly excited about the fact that there might be.
Well, I think, unfortunately, there needs to be.
Perfect.
It is such a solitary experience writing a book. But I do think even if it, maybe just a small book, but, things do go on. It's always the same. When you write a book, you realize that there is so much more to follow on. And, so long as this journey continues, I shall carry on doing it. Yeah.
Superb. I do think the books are I consider them a Bible, and I'm hoping that eventually you'll put all three together. A bit like, like Donna Eden has done with her Energy Medicine Bible.
You're talking about a trilogy already, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a bit like the child that's waiting for the next Harry Potter to come out, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Deborah, the thing is, I'm really an oral communicator. It's interesting, my chart has no air in it, which means you become good teachers and writers, but it's because you haven't got any. Do you know what I mean? But I am an oral communicator, so it is converting it then, because my mind, because it connects everything, it's so much more difficult to bring things into a linear way of writing. You know, writing is quite linear. It has to be, do you know what I mean? It's on the paper. But so to bring things in so that people can understand, it's quite a job, really. Yeah, and yet still keep it all connected.
Now, in this book, you've touched on the naturopathic techniques again. But people don't really use these techniques as they used to. Now, years ago, if I had an acute episode, my mother or my grandmother would have actually applied some of these techniques. And you talk about the old naturopaths, would say that actually you can only suppress something 3 times before actually it will then go deeper. How do we introduce these techniques to the wider community? Because in effect they are being lost, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, it is interesting, travelling to other countries, because the lady who runs Hay House, when Cellular Awakening was being published, she said, Barbara, the first people who will take your book will be Eastern Europe and Russia. And she was absolutely right. Because they are not being lost in certain areas, I mean, it is the climate here that people want an easy fix, But, everybody I know does techniques. And they are very powerful. I mean, you have to support the body in the healing process. You can't give it suddenly more work to do without supporting it. Otherwise, roots of elimination will become so overwhelmed. And this was such a strong lesson from Gerson. He realized that people were dying from auto-intoxication when they were following various things. And it is the Eastern thing, yin and yang, in and out. But I just think it's just very gently people revisiting them, because they're all old. It's what I call old-fashioned nursing.
Yeah, I agree. And can you explain suppression to my audience of what it actually means to suppress an illness or an acute, and why it creates further problems along the line?
Yes. I mean, the way I see disease is the first thing is stressed from without or within, predispositionally. So there's stress. Mm-hmm. This is felt on the water component of the body. And so if that still stays there as a resonance, the person will go into dehydration. And that's an easy one to understand. The fluids are more contracted. So it can't flow, it can't cleanse, it can't move. So you get this incredible stagnation, particularly in the lymphatic system, and then it starts to affect blood, sticky blood, oxygenation. So you have stress, dehydration, stagnation, and that changes the pH of the body, and then you start to get inflammation. And that's where acutes show up. Acutes tend to come into the category of the inflammatory, where the body is wanting to heat itself up, to thin the lymph, to get things moving. And in the West, it's the area of greatest suppression. All of the pharmaceutical products that are there to hit that acute stage, where something is really showing itself. It's kind of getting in the way, if you like, of everyday functioning. It's acute manifestation. But the body is doing that, A, to alert us, and B, to want to clear the stagnation that went before it. So if there is inflammation or acute, there will always be stagnation that was there before it. So in my logical mind, the answer is to remove the stagnation. Go to the thing that came before. Go to the stagnation of the body fluids. Change the way you're eating. Do some techniques. Change the way you approach the world. Change things in your life, which is actually then going to remove the stress. So instead of it being stress, creating dehydration, creating stagnation, creating an acute, you go backwards. However, if we just keep suppressing the acute, the body no longer has the energy to produce a flamboyant picture. It joins the chronic. And so eventually it will change the way the body works, the extreme stagnation, and then you start to get change in behavior at a much, much deeper level, that chronic picture. And then that's a longer journey to be unwinding, to bring things back. And eventually you get to the point where the cell is functioning totally differently. Instead of producing its ATP, 80% from oxygen and 20% from glucose, it has switched to 80% glucose and only 20% oxygen, because of the stagnation in all ways that the oxygen cannot reach the cell for its production of energy.
They also help to carry the spectrum of light, don't they? Things like the castor oil packing.
Oh, absolutely. The castor oil packing is a brilliant, brilliant one in terms of actually introducing the white light. Yes, anybody wanting to read more, to read Edgar Case's Palmer Christie. It's all about it. And, of course, there are some other very good books that I've listed as references about castor oil packing. Yeah.
Now, one of the points you make in the book is about the problem of modern life, that it seems intent on moving us further and further away from our natural connection, so further away from our potential. I completely agree with this, because I know from experience that people think the way I live my life is actually quite radical and a great discipline, yet I think I live and experience my life on a really extraordinary level now, due to using your techniques and due to applying the philosophy as closely as I can. What about those people who just want to do elements of it and just want to start on the journey? Where would they actually start?
Well, I really think, Deborah, to understand their story is probably, it is this whole thing, isn't it, of trying to get to know who we are. And I'd always said to my students at the beginning of the courses, I do believe the biggest stress is not being who we are. And, we've got to hear who we are, got to understand who we are. So, the first thing, I actually think, and I don't know whether you would agree, is to have to take more quiet moments. It's so crazy, isn't it, out there? It's absolutely crazy. the level of distraction is ridiculous. And when you think of the pineal, the third eye, and the importance of the melatonin to keep us in touch with the circadian rhythm and all of that, if we just think of electromagnetic pollution, is a nightmare trying to avoid. That will flatline the melatonin production. And being constantly busy, when you think of the Steiner approach to education, where the child is not intruded upon, it's allowed to stay for the first 7 years of its life in its imagination, because we create our own reality. And so I would say it is to take these quiet moments to reflect upon who we are, to get rid of the distraction, not to be sitting in front of a television being fed all the propaganda that is fed to make us more frightened. So it's quiet moments trying to reduce the fear and the stress. So change something about the lifestyle, even if they don't want to tackle touching their diet to begin with. But, to start by understanding that it's how we nurture the body that this vehicle will perform, and how it will access all the different levels that have been compartmentalized in all the teachings in the West.
The external fear factors are really interesting, in regards to the television and those aspects of things, and quieting the mind and taking those quiet times out. I remember saying to my naturopath years ago when I worked corporately, and she'd say, Deborah, you just need to meditate. And I used to say to her, Jean, I don't have time to breathe, never mind meditate. And and it just became almost a mantra to me, but she was absolutely right. But I couldn't do it in the environment that I was working in, and the lifestyle that I had to change it quite radically to actually experience what I've got now. But that has been quite a significant change, and modern life doesn't really help, even though it kind of promotes it on one level. So for instance, it has the yoga classes, but everybody, my clients will say, I've managed to fit in a yoga class this week, I've managed to do this, and then I drop the kids off, and so there's no actual time out. It's just another thing on their to-do list.
Well, it's funny because Benjamin, my son, who set up all the admin and everything for the college, he said, Mum, we really should always have a health warning and a life warning when people start the course. Because what you find is they learn, they encompass, but then it gets to a point with so many people where it challenges the very basis of their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And, I would always say to people, healing is how you live your life. It isn't a separate subject. Healing is really how you manifest yourself. And unfortunately, with the way things are set up, there are so many brick walls that people meet where they say, can't go through that one, absolutely can't, got to stay where I am. But, sadly, that just leaves them in that same paradigm. And there are all of, I think, I'm sure you would agree with what I'm going to say. Once you've tasted change, once you've tasted that different feeling, you'd never want to go back.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. My life is so different, and it's more my experience of life.
Yes.
On a moment-by-moment basis, many people struggle to relate to it, and I never thought I would experience it on this level and struggle to explain it. Yeah. And the first questions that I always ask, the I questions, motivation and creativity. And, when you say who has guided me, one's own inner creativity guides one. And, most people don't even know how to answer the question about their motivation and their creativity. Because it's all about, in my view, being aligned. And the vehicle really has got to be worked upon for any level of alignment. The biggest sadness I've experienced during my practice has been asking the question, what brings you joy? And so many people having to take it away with them because they truly don't know.
No, well, their fire element, therefore, is almost non-existent, which governs their heart, controls their heart.
Well, I can genuinely say that Barbara's philosophy has brought me incredible joy and an experience of life that I never thought I would have. So thank you so much for joining me today, Barbara, to talk about your philosophy and your latest book, which is called Our Return to the Light and is published by Hay House. I've put links to it on the blog, and I've also put links to Cellular Awakening, which everybody knows on my newsletter I've been promoting like mad because I think you should all read it. And I'm really happy that I hear there's a third on the way. But so thank you so much for joining me today, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and don't hold out too much on timing for a third one.
No.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Deborah.